Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Hancock, and welcome to the inaugural launch of our podcast, AI Lyfe. And I can't think of two people that I would enjoy launching this podcast with is my co-founder of MyMobileLyfe, Michael Grillo, and one of my good buddies and also a friend of MyMobileLyfe who we've been helping out with his foundation. We'll get into that a little bit soon. Marty McNair. So again, welcome, guys.
Thank you for having me.
And I guess since this is the inaugural launch of our AI-focused podcast, first we need to introduce who we are as MyMobileLyfe. We started off as a digital marketing agency about 10 years ago now, Mike.
Longer than that.
Longer than that now. Well, we've been here.
Like 20.
It felt like 20. We've actually been very, very honored to be here at the ALC for almost 10 years now, definitely. So we've loved that partnership, and we've grown with them in providing a whole bunch of different services. We are talking about AI right now. So 9 months ago, Mike, it's almost like we birthed a baby. 9 months ago is when we really started to engage in the AI space. A year ago when we were here, we were primarily still in our digital communication strategy of providing those type of services. And in 9 months, with your help, we have developed ebooks, apps, courses to grow our AI business. So what's your involvement in all this? What have you done to help?
I've done a little bit of everything, mostly everything you told me to do. No. I got to give you credit for turning me on to AI in general, because before we really got serious about it, I was just reading it in the news, just like everybody else was, wondering is this a fad? Is this going to be something else? And once we really started using the tools for ourselves, it's just been amazing. Personally, AI saves me hours and hours and hours a week. So that's time is money the way I see it. But while Rick is taking the lead in authoring a lot of our ebooks and building our courses, I've primarily worked on building out our software. So we have essentially a brain in a box. We'll talk about OC later. OC, the one-click chief AI officer. I want the world to meet OC. He's a fun guy.
So Marty is also an expert and has learned a lot in AI, but I want to introduce Marty on another level, and then we'll kind of segue into the AI space. I met Marty several years ago, just as an aside. Marty and I are fun-loving guys, and we follow a straight and narrow path for the most part, but we both have an affinity for cigars. And so the first time I met Marty was at a cigar lounge. I was about to leave, and he was coming in, and he introduced himself, said, hey, can I watch something on TV? I said, I don't care, I'm leaving. We got into a conversation about our favorite football teams, and he said that he was a fan of college and University of Maryland. Being that I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, I was somewhat familiar with the Maryland program, but that's not a common team to cheer for, especially in the deep south of Atlanta where we were at the time. He then told me about the story, and the way he got into it. He's asked me, hey, did you hear about this young man that passed away playing football at the University of Maryland? I said, yeah, and I started telling him the story about this. And then he let me politely talk about this, and he said, that was my son. I literally sat back in my chair, and then he proceeded to tell me the story and the journey of how his son passed playing football at the University of Maryland, but how he had rebounded and created a foundation. So Marty, talk about the foundation and talk about some new legislation that has come across because of that.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. The interesting thing, it's hard to believe that was like 7 years ago,
I know.
right? Yeah. Wow, it's been that long. And the interesting thing, man, it's been 8 years actually, 7 years actually this year. But one of the things, as you mentioned, that was my son Jordan that passed from a heat-related injury, suffered on the first day of conditioning drills at the University of Maryland. I tell people all the time, if you had told me this would be my journey 8 years ago, Mike, I would have never believed you at all. It's no way possible. But one of the things, as I started the foundation 3 days after Jordan passed, and basically it was like, do I go into this rabbit hole of depression and despair, blaming myself, or do I do something about it? And obviously I chose door number 2 to really make an impact. And, here we are in our 7th year, and, it's ironic or it's ironic that we would be here at CBC because we had just submitted we've gotten 4 laws passed at the state level in Maryland. However, we submitted for the second time, resubmitted a bill called the Jordan McNair Heat Fatality Prevention Act. And that literally was just resubmitted to Congress back in July Congressman Kwame Fume. We have a really, really dynamic list of co-sponsors. Senator Angela also Brooks out of Maryland, and quite a few as we're gaining some momentum with sponsors. And really, like for me, our goal really this week is really just to connect with a lot of legislators, because when you look at kids, right, one of the main things, like, you know, when you talk about youth and you talk about sports, especially safety, there really isn't any type of lines that are crossed in the sand. So a lot of times that's something that no matter what your culture, what your political beliefs are, we all share that common thread of a child, right? And most of all, sports. That's the one thing that brings us together every Sunday, every Saturday, you know, at every coliseum or stadium that we're in, is that one thing in the game. So what we're really focusing on now is really bipartisan support to really get this bill to create baseline standard. And basically what the bill does is it focuses on heat-related injury emergency action plans, right? So really, really quick, an emergency action plan is the equivalent of a fire drill, right? However, every time you go out on the field, the potential for a fire can happen just like that. However, one of the things that when we look at emergency action plans, we want to create baseline standard, especially at the congressional level, right? Where it's the same all the way across the board in all 50 plus states, versus just kind of saying, okay, we do it this way over here, we do it this way over here. Everybody follows best practices. But the goal really right now is to, this year with resubmission, we submitted it in regards to the collegiate aspect. But again, when we did that a couple years ago, I was telling the congressman, I said, I think we should add high schools to this, right? And basically what this does is, you know, really at the collegiate level, it does impact funding. So if anybody is getting any type of federal funding for school, Pell Grants, things like that for student athletes, this kind of holds a higher level of accountability where you have to report your emergency action plan for heat. Make sure report that you have the right systems in place when you are at this level, right? At the high school level, we just want to, again, create baseline standard around safety.
So it's kind of symbolic that we're in the author's literary circle area. You're also a published author multiple times.
Couple times.
So, you know, what's your observation here of being surrounded by all these folks who are selling or talking about things that are passionate about, just like you, which was driving force behind your books?
You know, Rick, you've been a mentor to me and a voice of reason for a lot of years, Mike, since we've been knowing each other. And I can remember my first book, Can My Child Play? You know, remember, you know, I called you. I was really agitated or just excited, or I was a little bit, I think the term was maybe, I was a little bit more agitated because when you're an initial author, you look at it one way, right? And my attorneys at the time wouldn't let me put the book out because we were right neck deep, eyeball deep in legislation. And they wanted to read it first to make sure, you know, I didn't say anything to hurt the case. And then basically, and you told me, like, what's the rush, right? And I'm like, no, I got to get it out. I got to get it out. And as you and I were just talking earlier, you know, really to be around a room full of authors, you know, when you do your first book, it's all about that, hey, I got my first book out the way, right? And then when you do that second book, it's like you're steady taking lessons on what you learned from the first one. You know what I mean? I could have really played the first book so much more further than I did, but because I wanted to rush and I wanted to get acclamation from everybody, versus my third book is really about, if somebody says, well, what's the book about? Now I know the answer what do I want people to get from the book? Yeah. Right? So the more you do it, it changes with everyone you do.
So the two books that we authored in MyMobileLyfe is the AI Dictionary, which is a book that when we first started our journey in the AI space, trying to find commonality was really important to me. I was once in academia, and that was something that I always kind of stressed. The second book is, as we furthered our journey and we started talking to a lot of businesses who were looking for AI support, we found that they needed a chief AI officer. And so we wrote a book based on that. But we also found that in this day and age, you didn't have to have a physical person be that chief AI officer. You go on LinkedIn, you can see people are paying $300,000, $400,000 a year for a chief AI officer. Most companies can't afford that. So we created, or had the idea of creating a virtual AI in the box. That's where Mike hasn't written his book yet, but he's written software that has launched our premier product called the Chief AI Officer. So Mike, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so OC, the one-click chief AI officer, is built on literally the latest and greatest AI large language models that are out there. And it's just amazing technology. I've been developing web apps for the better part of 20 years now. Websites longer than that. And just getting, 10 years ago, getting one computer to talk to another was kind of a mini miracle for me. I learned, I went to the school of Google, so if I didn't know how to do something, I would look it up. But now we can, in addition to making these simple connections, that app you're connecting to is this big brain that knows everything that's happened in human history. And it's smart enough to figure out what you're trying to ask. If you misspell words, it can figure that out too. If you give it a different language, it can figure that out as well. And just give you contextual, rich information that makes sense. So that's really the basis of OC. So the one main feature is the chat console. So at any time, just like using any other large language model, you can start a new conversation, ask it a question, ask it to evaluate something you've written. You can ask it to help guide you a step-by-step through a process if you're struggling with a problem. So that's, we've gotten good feedback off of that so far. Also with that, we have a ever-growing prompt library. So we pre-write prompts for you in case you're looking for ideas to get the most out of OC. And those are good places to get started. One of the newest features we just released is an assessment tool. So we have pre-programmed 4 different levels of assessment. So if you run a company, it's company-wide. You can do it for a department, for a team, or for yourself or any other individual on your team. And all these questions are different for each path. And they really just get into every aspect of AI and technology in your company. And the idea is just to give you a baseline, how AI ready are you? We even give you a score too. So by the time you're done answering all these questions, you could either type it or you could talk to the system too, because we want to make it easy for you. Then at the end, you get your responses are graded in like 10 or 11 different areas. You get scored in those different areas. You get recommendations for tools that you can adopt. So we want to make this technology tangible and accessible to anybody, whether you just read about it in the news, you've been using it for a while, or if you've never done anything with it in your life. So
yeah, I think the assessment part, Mike, is really the most critical part. Even though we've developed a tool that people can talk to it and it will respond, which expedites the whole process. When people are trying to figure out what to do in AI, I think they should begin at the assessment stage. What do you need? You may not need AI. You may need automation. You may just need to clean up your data sets. So any organization that's considering using AI should do an assessment first off. Now, Marty is not only just has grown a great foundation, he's also a fanatic in the AI space. Has gotten very, all of our clients, Mike, I think Marty is
he's the bravest.
He's delved in the furthest without really the resistance.
Right.
He asked me a ton of questions. So your experience of running a nonprofit, running a business, and the use of AI in basically a year's time. Last year's time, neither one of us was really engaged in AI.
Right.
Now we are.
Right. I'm gonna tell you, like Mike said earlier, one thing I took from one of you guys' classes was you're gonna save 2 things: time and money, right? And you're gonna eventually you're gonna get tired of paying somebody else to use AI for you. and we've been on this journey for a while.
Right.
So imagine, it was a couple years ago we was talking to somebody about that app, remember? And that guy said like over 20 or 30 grand. Remember, because I asked him where he was from. He was like in between Russia and wherever they were warring at. Remember that, Mike?
Oh yeah.
But again, now versus how far we've come in regards to AI. And to me, I think at times where it's almost like the smartphone, like with the iPhone, like we're still only using, to me, I'm only using like maybe 30% of what it actually does. And now I think that at times, like I catch myself going so far in that hole where I could almost forget the project I'm working on. Like, let me come back out of it and just simplify what my initial questions were. You know what I mean? This is what I wanted to do, but it's like, hey, do you want me to do this? Oh yeah. And every time I say yeah, it takes me further. and further. And it's like, okay, what was my initial prompt? So that's where I'm at now. And also I'm learning from you where, it's nothing you really can't do with AI.
Right.
I think that, really, especially from taking your class, is that really just trying to really identify what's good for your toolkit, right? I don't need 50 things. It's like, okay, this is what I do. I do a lot of presentations.
Right.
Okay, I do this, I do that. Okay, all right, as opposed to me having those 10 things, now I can have 2 or 3 or 4 things in my toolkit to do everything I need to be done.
You're a fan of Gamma too,
right? I like Gamma. Yeah. It makes, and even with me speaking of Gamma, I can remember earlier this year, I paid a guy $400 to do a same presentation that I could have did in Gamma. I say that to really understand AI, you're going to have to sit with it and play with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And for you to get the best results, you're going to have to do the work.
Yeah, and if I could just say, AI, it's almost like having somebody work for you.
Oh,
It really is. You can't just set it and forget it. You can't just take the output and just run with it without evaluating it.
Right.
You have to be the editor. You have to be the manager. You really have to manage it because management really is a human making a decision.
Yeah.
And you can't just leave that to chance to a computer.
Totally agree.
Good points, Mike, because once I'm finished with this podcast, I got to go across and get on the stage. And the topic that we're going to be talking about is pivoting. And I think the level of experience that people 40, 50, and 60 years old bring to AI is very, very valuable because that's what AI drives on. It needs data, it needs good information, it needs prompting, it needs the ability to iterate upon the prompts. And I'm really trying to encourage folks who are kind of still reticent on embracing AI to find something and identify a passion of theirs, a hobby of theirs, something that they advocate, and begin building upon that. Because, you engage AI because you're trying to grow and market the foundation and the mission of the foundation. Mike engages it because that's now our line of business. So we built off of a knowledge base that we have. So we're coming at it from a position of strength. A lot of people are just using AI right now as a glorified search engine. It's much more than that. It's much more than that.
But Rick, one of the things that I'm a firm believer in, AI tell you, AI is like, say 70%, 75% of the process. The other 25% is the application too.
Yeah.
Like, that's the big thing. You can ask it all day, but, without application, beyond, hey, something that I'm trying to do, you have to, add application to, what you're getting from AI as well.
Yeah. Mike, you deal with that, creating code all the time. You'll start in one application and maybe end up in something else.
Yeah. And, really, I heavily use ChatGPT, especially for generating code or reviewing code or making my existing code simpler. It's gotten a lot better, way better.
Right.
Just the sheer amount of memory. It can remember things I talked about days ago.
Yeah.
My conversations, they tend to run like hundreds of, responses deep. So, if your computer's a little slow, that kind of taxes your computer and it takes a while to get a response out. But, all the LLMs are just getting better at handling vast amounts of information.
Right.
Yeah.
So Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot. You have 2 authors here. You haven't written your book yet. Ask us questions on what your book is going to be about.
Wait up. Can I say what the title should be? The Man Behind the Curtain.
I can be sure. I'm not usually a fan of the camera, but I'm doing Rick.
The Man Behind the Curtain.
I don't know. Being a technical person, I feel like I have a lot of good ideas in my head, and it's I'm not as TV ready as Rick, who used to be on TV. Marty, you talk to everybody all the time, so it's hard to know if I'm making sense to people, if I'm being like overly technical. But I don't know. I like to teach. I like to take complex things like web development, kind of break it down in ways that people can understand. Like it's really all it is just call and response. You give input, you get output, and that it took me 10 years to wrap my head around that. That's really just what computers are. But as far as what would I write about? I don't know. I'm passionate about a lot of things. I love music. I could write about music, but it's definitely not related to anything we're doing here.
You make your own alcohol.
I think alcohol, beer.
Okay,
It's,
well, it's
you know,
alcohol.
I'm not in the woods distilling. It's not fully legal, and I think it's live. So let's keep me out of
Right.
jail,
Yeah. Let's keep it above board.
Yeah. Well, no, I want to help get rid of the fear of AI for people, because I live up in the Northeast, and people are scared still. They're scared it's going to take their jobs. It's scared it's going to make them redundant.
Right.
It's scared that it's going to take creative energy and creative intuition out of everyday life. Like, they're worried people aren't going to write music or write books anymore.
Right.
And some people might get a little lazy and coast off of the work that AI can do, but there's still going to be room for human ingenuity, human creativity, and it's up to all of us to guide the technology.
Yeah.
So we have a couple more minutes left. You have another book in you, and just update people on what's next for the Jordan McNair Foundation.
Yeah, man. So I'm in the process now. Right. I went totally to the left with my second book. That's the one I'm in the process of searching for a publisher now. My literary agent is, and basically that's called Adaptability. The subtitle was not The Trap That Killed the Mouse, but it was his love for the cheese, right? And one of the main things, it talks about generational trauma in African-American men, specifically my family. My trauma, my dad was in Vietnam 3 times, you know what I mean? Generational trauma. My dad really was, when you have your parents, we deal with our parents one-dimensionally. Until we really dig, like I found so much about my father I didn't even know.
Me too.
And, my father, born and raised in Chicago, he's 86, went to Emmett Till's funeral. Like, I didn't even know that. But you see all this trauma along the way, and it's just that generational, as black men, we become so callous to childhood trauma, community trauma, urban trauma, and we just think this is the way to go. And we don't realize, like, the effects that it really has on us. So that's what I really write about in my second book, just really based off of my story, my father's story, and just really everywhere I came from. In regards to the Jordan McNair Foundation, man, we're constantly evolving. Like, our big thing now is in the state of collegiate sports. Basically we focus on, like, I wrote a curriculum that we do in high schools. We do one-day summits. The goal really is to bring all this information to families earlier, because now this is a business. When Jordan was being recruited, Mike, we was just happy to get a 4-year scholarship. Nowadays, you're signing hundreds of thousands of dollar contract. And I just think it's very, very disheartening for families or young people to have to make these type of adult decisions that can cripple you for the rest of it, can do more damage than
without
good.
having that information.
Yep.
All right. Well, hey, this is the inaugural launch of AI Lyfe, our podcast. We definitely are happy that you joined us on this one, and hopefully you'll join us on our journey. Mike, you're going to post up some links on not only just the MyMobileLyfe.com website, and that's Lyfe, Lyfe, but also on one click.
Yeah, actually, you can go there now, oneclickai.ai, and you'll find everything at the top there. You find links to our store where you can get our ebooks, sign up for our courses. You can find information on our own company's AI services, as well as more information about OC, the One-Click Chief AI Officer. So check it out.
All right. I want to thank Mike and Marty. Guys, thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.